The air that night carried the faint sweetness of pumpkins and smoke. Porch lights glowed in warm orange halos, and the sound of children's laughter echoed down the street as they darted between houses with plastic buckets and glow sticks. Inside the Monroe home, laughter mingled with music and the soft clinking of glasses. Lila Monroe, dressed as a 1920s flapper with silver sequins catching the light, seemed the center of everything. Smiling, pouring wine, tucking loose strands of hair behind her ear as she moved from guest to guest. From the outside, it looked like a perfect evening. But Evan, standing by the kitchen island with his half-empty drink, could see the strain behind her smile. She'd been quieter lately, distant. Every time he reached for her hand, she found a reason to move away. Tonight, even as she leaned into the laughter, he caught the flicker in her eyes. Something tired, something rehearsed. Around 9, most of the neighbors drifted home, carrying leftover cupcakes and murmured goodnights. The Monroe's living room grew still except for the low hum of a record player spinning in the corner. Lila began clearing glasses, humming absently, while Evan lingered by the back door, staring out at the yard. The jack-o'-lanterns flickered, their carved faces melting into strange shapes. "Do you have to sulk every time we have people over?" she said softly, not looking up. Evan's voice came out sharper than he intended. "I'm not sulking. I'm trying to enjoy the night, the one you said was supposed to fix things." She stopped, glass in hand. "You think a party fixes a marriage?" He sighed, rubbing his temple. "I think pretending everything's fine doesn't help either." The silence stretched between them. Outside, a dog barked. The record player clicked to an end. Lila set the glass down and turned to him. For a moment, the mask dropped. "Evan, we can't keep doing this." Her voice trembled, almost too low to hear. But then she smiled again, quick and false, like pulling a curtain back over a wound. She picked up the next plate and the conversation ended there. By 10:30, the neighborhood had gone quiet. The Monroe's home, dimly lit by orange bulbs and candlelight, felt smaller, heavier. Evan sat on the couch, scrolling absently through his phone. Lila had gone upstairs an hour ago. He thought she might be getting ready for bed, but he hadn't heard the water running. A knock came at the front door, soft, hesitant. He frowned. When he opened it, Mrs. Vale, their elderly neighbor, stood on the porch in a shawl and slippers. "Sorry, dear," she said. "Didn't mean to bother you. Just thought I heard shouting earlier. Everything all right?" Evan forced a smile. "Everything's fine. Just a long night." She nodded slowly, eyes flicking toward the upstairs window where a faint shadow passed behind the curtain. "All right then. Happy Halloween." He closed the door, locking it carefully. The sound of the bolt sliding home echoed too loud in the empty space. When he finally climbed the stairs, the bedroom light was off. Lila's costume lay crumpled across the chair. Her perfume still lingered in the air, sharp and floral mixed with something metallic. The bathroom door stood slightly open. He knocked once, twice. No answer. He pushed it open. Empty. Downstairs, the back door was ajar, the wind moving the curtain like a restless hand. Her phone lay on the counter beside an untouched glass of water. He stared at it, the screen lighting up with the last text she sent earlier that evening. "We all talk after everyone is gone." He stepped outside, barefoot on the cold patio tiles. The night was silent except for the low rustle of leaves. The swing in the yard swayed gently, creaking. He called her name once, then again. No answer. The next morning, the neighborhood was thick with whispers. Patrol cars lined the street, lights flashing against the damp asphalt. Evan sat on the front steps, a blanket around his shoulders, eyes red but dry. Officers moved through the house, dusting, photographing, measuring. Mrs. Vale watched from her porch, her face pale and drawn. "She never would have just left," she said softly to a uniformed officer. She loved this house. Detectives asked Evan the same questions over and over. What time he last saw her, whether they'd argued, if anyone else had come by. He gave the same answers, steady but detached, as if rehearsed. When they searched his hands for scratches, he flinched. Inside, the house looked frozen in time, A single overturned chair, a faint wine stain on the carpet, a candle burned down to wax and smoke. On the wall near the staircase, one of Lila S. paintings hung crooked, a dark portrait of a woman in a red dress, her face blurred by streaks of paint. Late that evening, after the police left, Evan wandered through the rooms alone. He stopped at the back door again, watching the curtain shift in the wind. On the kitchen counter sat her phone, dark now, beside a ring of dust where her glass had been. He reached for it, hesitated, then set it down. The yard beyond was dim, only the faint glow of streetlights catching the outline of the garden. For a moment he thought he saw movement near the fence, a shape slipping between shadows, but when he stepped closer, it was gone. Only the wind answered. He locked the door, turned off the lights, and stood in the dark, listening. Somewhere deep inside the house, a floorboard creaked. It could have been the wind. It could have been nothing. But in that breathless silence, Evan Monroe felt the weight of something he couldn't name, the feeling that his wife hadn't just disappeared. She'd been taken by something far colder, far closer than anyone yet understood. And as dawn began to gray the horizon, the first police report went out. Lila Monroe, missing, last seen Halloween night. The story that would unravel everything had just begun. Detective Marla Grayson arrived just after sunrise, her unmarked sedan pulling to the curb in front of the Monroe house. The street was quiet now, Halloween decorations sagging in the pale morning light, their cheerful orange faded into gray. Crime scene tape fluttered across the driveway, whispering with the wind. She stepped out, coffee in hand, and took a long look at the house. The blinds were drawn, the porch light still on. It looked like a place that didn't yet know it was haunted. Inside, the air was stale with perfume and candle smoke. The forensics team was finishing up. A camera flash went off near the kitchen counter where Lila's phone still sat, sealed in an evidence bag. Marla's eyes traced the space slowly, the half-empty wine glasses, the faint outline of a handprint on the countertop, the curtain swaying gently near the back door. She'd seen dozens of disappearances, but this one carried something off, like the house itself was keeping a secret. She found Evan Monroe in the living room, sitting stiffly on the couch. His face was pale, unshaven, and his wedding ring clinked softly against the mug he held. "Mr. Monroe," she said, crouching slightly so their eyes met. "I'm Detective Grayson. I know this is difficult, but I need to go over a few details again." He nodded. His eyes didn't quite focus. "You said you last saw your wife around 10:30? "Yes." She said she was tired. Went upstairs. His voice was calm, deliberate, as though he'd rehearsed it. "And when did you realize she was gone?" "When I came downstairs after midnight. The door was open." Marla studied him, the subtle tightening of his jaw, the way his thumb kept circling the mug. "Any sign she planned to leave? Packed a bag, called someone?" "No, she wouldn't just leave." There was no tremor in his voice, no overt grief, only exhaustion. She'd seen men like that before, controlled, polished, terrified of what emotion might reveal. When she stepped outside again, Mrs. Vale was waiting by the fence, wrapped in a thick shawl. Her white hair caught the light like frost. "I told the officer already," she said, "but I heard them arguing before the music stopped. I didn't want to pry, but—" She trailed off, looking at the window above the porch. "He's not the same since she went missing." Marla gave a small nod. "You knew Lila well?" "She was kind. Lonely, maybe. Always painting late into the night. Sometimes I'd see her light on past 2. Marla thanked her and returned inside. Something about the house made her uneasy. The stillness, the faint hum in the walls. Upstairs she found Lila's studio. Canvases lined the walls, the air heavy with the smell of turpentine and dust. Brushes lay scattered beside an unfinished painting. Broad red strokes slashed across a gray background. She crouched near the vent beneath the window, noticing a corner of charred paper lodged in the grate. With a pen, she pulled it free. Then another. And another. 3 half-burned pages. The handwriting was looping, careful. Lila's. The words were fragmented by fire, but what remained sent a chill through her chest. I can't sleep knowing he's watching again. If anything happens to me, tell someone the truth. I thought I could trust him. I was wrong. Marla's hand froze on the last line. She read it twice. The edges of the paper blackened her fingertips. Who were you afraid of, Lila? She murmured. Downstairs, Evan was still seated, staring into nothing. She approached quietly, holding one of the pages inside a plastic sleeve. Do you recognize this? He blinked, frowning. What is that? It was behind an air vent in your wife's studio. Looks like she wrote it recently. He leaned closer, his face tightening as he read the words. She wrote a lot of things when she was upset. You can't take that seriously. Marla tilted her head. Was she upset often? He hesitated. She had moods. After the miscarriage, she wasn't herself. She saw a therapist, but she wouldn't let me come to the sessions. Do you know the therapist's name? He shook his head too quickly. No, she never said. Marla made a note. The sound of her pen scratching filled the silence. Where were you between 10:30 and midnight? She asked finally. Here, downstairs. I fell asleep on the couch. She raised a brow. Your neighbor says she heard arguing before the music stopped. His eyes flickered. She's old, detective. Probably misheard the TV. Marla let the silence hang. We'll verify everything. When she left the room, Evan exhaled hard, a sound halfway between a sigh and a growl. Behind him, the clock on the mantel ticked steadily, too loud in the still house. That evening, Marla returned to the station with the burned letters sealed in an evidence bag. Her partner suggested it might be a domestic case, but Marla wasn't convinced. Something about the wording. He asked, watching again. Didn't it sound like a husband's argument? It sounded like surveillance. At sunset, she went back to the Monroes alone. The forensics team had cleared out, and the house felt even emptier now, echoing with soft creaks as it cooled. She walked the halls with her flashlight, letting the beam trace along the walls, the corners, the silent stairs. In the living room, she paused, listening. Somewhere deep inside the ductwork, she swore she heard a faint metallic click, a sound too deliberate to be the wind. She followed it to the studio again. The room smelled of paint and burnt paper. The unfinished canvas sat where she'd left it. Marla moved closer, tilting her head. In the fading light, the painting took new shape. Not just red strokes, but eyes, hollow, crimson, staring from a faceless head. She felt something twist in her chest. Lila Monroe hadn't just been painting. She'd been documenting. Marla turned off her flashlight and stood in the silence, the shadows shifting around her. Somewhere behind the walls, something clicked again. Faint, rhythmic, like the pulse of a hidden machine. Her voice was barely a whisper. What were you watching, Lila? The house didn't answer. But as Marla stepped away from the canvas, she knew this was only the surface. Somewhere in these walls, the truth was waiting, and it was still breathing. The light from the hallway fell across the painting, catching on the red of those eyeless sockets, glowing like blood under glass. Then the bulb flickered once, twice, and went out. Rain came hard that night, sweeping down in gray sheets that blurred the edges of the world. Detective Marla Grayson sat in her car across the street from the Monroe house, wipers moving in a steady rhythm as lightning flashed over the rooftops. The house stood dark, its windows hollow and still. She wasn't supposed to be here. The forensics team had already cleared the scene and the paperwork was still pending. But something about those faint clicks in the walls had been haunting her since the day before. The wind rattled the trees. She finished her coffee, stepped out into the storm, and crossed the street. Her boots sank into wet leaves. By the time she reached the porch, her coat was soaked through, but she barely felt it. The front door opened with the same reluctant groan as before, and the smell of damp wood and old perfume met her like a ghost. Inside, the silence was deeper than she remembered. Her flashlight beam cut through the dark, brushing over empty picture frames and the crooked painting on the stairwell. the blurred woman in red. She climbed the steps slowly, her hand trailing along the banister slick with dust. Upstairs, a faint creak echoed above her. She looked up. The attic door was slightly ajar. Marla exhaled, her breath visible in the chill air. She pulled the cord. The ladder dropped down with a hollow clatter. The attic smelled of insulation and old paint. Dust swirled in the flashlight's beam like falling snow. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, each labeled in Lila's careful handwriting. Summer clothes, art supplies, photographs. But something else caught her attention. A faint hum, almost mechanical, coming from behind a pile of canvases near the far wall. She knelt, pushing the boxes aside, and found a wooden panel slightly misaligned. When she tugged, it gave way with a low crack. Behind it was a narrow space filled with wires, small blinking lights, and a row of tiny monitors stacked like forgotten eyes. Her heart tightened. Cameras. Dozens of them. Each feed flickered. The living room, kitchen, studio, bedroom. Every room in the Monroe house. Marla reached for the power switch and the screens came alive with static, then color. The timestamp in the corner read, October 27th. The first feed showed Lila pacing the studio, her hands trembling. She spoke to someone just out of frame. The voice that answered was low, steady, and unfamiliar. "Please," she said on the recording. "You said no one would ever find out." The man's voice was calm. "You're overreacting, Lila. I told you, I'll take care of it." Lightning flashed through the attic window, illuminating Marla's face. She leaned closer. The camera angle never caught the man's face, only the shadow that stretched long across the wall. "Who are you?" she thought. The next recording was dated October 29th. Lila sat on the edge of her bed, head in her hands. "He's starting to notice," she whispered. "Evan knows something's wrong." Then came the faint hum of the back door opening. She looked up, startled. "You shouldn't be here," she said, standing abruptly. The shadow moved closer. "I told you," the voice said. "I can't lose you now." Static cut the rest. Marla fast-forwarded through hours of silence, empty rooms, Lila painting alone. Then the timestamp jumped to October 31st. The final clip began with laughter, muffled, distant. Lila stood in the kitchen, still in her flapper costume. The camera shook slightly as if someone was adjusting it from inside the wall. She turned toward the sound of footsteps. "Evan?" she asked, but the voice that answered wasn't Evan's. "Close the door, Lila." Her hand trembled on the counter. "You shouldn't be here," she repeated, her tone sharp now. "We said it was over." "You said no one would get hurt," the man replied. She shook her head, stepping back. "You promised." The screen glitched, static flooding the feed. For a second, Marla thought she saw movement. A flash of Lila reaching for something, a blur of motion. Then the image went black. The timestamp froze at 11:47 p.m. Marla's pulse quickened. That was 13 minutes before Evan claimed to find the door open. She rewound the footage, but the moment repeated the same way. Static, black, silence. The tape ended there. Below her, thunder cracked, rattling the rafters. She took a steadying breath and scanned the wiring again. Whoever installed this system knew what they were doing. No amateur job. The cameras were concealed, the wiring routed cleanly into the walls. She photographed everything, noting serial numbers and timestamps. But one thing stood out. The power source wasn't the house grid. It was external. A small portable generator still humming faintly in the corner. Someone had kept it running. She turned toward the ladder, then froze. A creak below. The faint sound of a door closing. Marla killed her flashlight instantly. The attic sank into darkness. She held her breath, listening. Rain drummed on the roof. Another sound followed. Slow, deliberate footsteps crossing the floor beneath her. "Evan?" she called softly. No answer. The steps stopped. For a long moment, the house was utterly still. Then a door slammed downstairs and the sound of hurried movement faded into the storm. Marla climbed down, gun drawn, sweeping the rooms one by one. Empty. The front door was open, the wind whipping through the hall. Whoever had been inside was gone. She closed the door, locking it, her heart still pounding. The monitors upstairs still glowed faintly through the cracks in the ceiling. Someone had been watching this house, maybe still was. The next day, Evan came to the station after being called in for follow-up questioning. His eyes were bloodshot, hands shaking. "I know what you think," he said, sitting across from her. "But I didn't hurt her. You have to believe me." Marla studied him carefully. "Then tell me who she was afraid of." He swallowed hard. "I don't know. She changed these last few months, started locking the studio door, hiding her phone. Sometimes she'd be on calls late at night whispering. I thought she was talking to someone else." "You never asked who?" "I tried. She said it was work, that's all." He rubbed his face. "You think I could have done something to her? I can see it in your eyes." Marla didn't answer. She slid one of the still images from the footage across the table, a grainy shot of Lila facing the unseen man. "Who is this?" He stared at it for a long time, shaking his head. "I don't know," but she was terrified. Outside, the storm returned, rain hammering the windows. Marla's thoughts drifted back to the attic, the red eyes in the painting, the hidden wires, the faceless shadow. That night, unable to sleep, she replayed the recording over and over in her mind, Lila's final words echoing through the static. "You said no one would get hurt." She didn't yet know whose voice answered or how deep this secret ran, but she knew one thing with certainty. This wasn't a story of one broken marriage. It was a story of control, of obsession, of someone who needed to own Lila Monroe completely. And as thunder rolled over the neighborhood again, Marla's phone buzzed with a new lead. The name of Lila's therapist, Dr. Adrian Cross. The storm outside raged on, and the real one was just beginning. The morning after the storm, the air over Willow Lane felt washed clean, though nothing about the Monroe case felt any clearer. Detective Marla Grayson stood at her desk, eyes fixed on the folder newly dropped off by forensics. The name on the tab read, Dr. Adrian Cross, psychiatric consultant. She flipped it open. Inside were transcripts from Lila Monroe's therapy sessions, authorized under a warrant signed hours ago. At first glance, the notes read like standard grief counseling, a woman recovering from loss, mourning the miscarriage of a child she'd longed for. But between the sterile lines and clipped observations, something darker breathed. Cross's tone shifted from professional to personal, then intimate. His final note before Lila vanished was chillingly brief. "She's become unstable. I'm concerned she might do something reckless." Marla felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She'd seen this before, the blurring of boundaries, the quiet exploitation that hid behind polished words. She closed the folder, grabbed her keys, and drove. Dr. Adrian Cross's office sat on the edge of town, a minimalist building of glass and stone. Inside, the lights were low, the scent of cedar hanging in the air. He met her in the waiting room, tall, sharply dressed, his expression calm, almost too calm. "Detective Grayson," he said, extending a hand. "I was told you wanted to discuss one of my patients." "Lila Monroe," she replied, not shaking his hand. "You were her therapist for about 8 months, correct?" He nodded. "After her miscarriage, yes. A devastating situation. She was fragile." Marla studied him. "Fragile enough to start an affair with her therapist?" A flicker of something, irritation maybe, passed through his eyes before he smiled. "I think you've been misinformed. Lila was emotionally dependent, certainly. But romantic attachment? No. She may have imagined something, but I maintained professional distance." "Professional distance doesn't explain why you met her outside office hours," Marla said, sliding a printed photo across the table, a still frame from traffic camera footage showing his car parked outside Lila's home a week before she vanished. His jaw tightened. "She was in crisis. She called me. I went to check on her." Marla leaned forward. Did you go inside? He hesitated. Briefly. What did you talk about? He looked away, adjusting his cufflinks. I don't remember exactly. But Marla could see in his eyes that he did, every word. When she returned to the station, forensics had already pulled a new piece of evidence from the attic S camera system, a small USB drive hidden inside one of the vent panels. Its contents were audio recordings labeled only by date. She plugged in her headphones, pressed play, and Lila's voice filled her ears. Session 14. He says this will help me process everything. I don't know if I want to talk anymore, but he says I need to. He says I owe it to him. Another click. Another file. Session 18. I told him I was scared. He laughed. Said I only felt that way because... Rain slicked the pavement outside the Monroe residence as Detective Marla Grayson stood beneath the porch light, her breath visible in the chill. The anonymous tip had come at dawn. A scrambled voice warning her that the truth S beneath your feet. It could have been a prank, another cruel game played by someone obsessed with the case, but something about the tone, trembling, urgent, almost pleading, made her listen. She moved through the house quietly, her flashlight cutting through the dimness. The air smelled of dust and mold, of secrets buried too long. Down the hall, the attic's access door still hung open from her last visit, the storm having rattled it loose. But tonight, she wasn't going up. She was going down. In the laundry room, she found it, a section of tile that didn't match the rest. New grout, slightly uneven. She knelt, tapping it with her flashlight until she heard the hollow sound beneath. Heart quickening, she pried it open. A metal hatch waited under a thin layer of dust. No latch, no handle, just a narrow groove for fingers to slip through. She hesitated, then pulled. A stale breath of air rose from below. The stairs creaked as she descended into darkness, the beam of her flashlight flickering against concrete walls. It was small, maybe 15 feet wide, but every inch of it screamed wrong. The walls were lined with canvas scraps, unfinished paintings, smears of color that looked like blood in the light. Lila's art, but darker, rawer, frantic strokes, distorted faces, twisted limbs. In the center of the room sat a chair bolted to the floor. A camera was fixed to a tripod facing it, the red recording light still blinking. Marla's hand trembled as she reached for it. The battery had long since died, but a tiny wire ran from the base through the wall, straight into the house, electrical grid. Someone had kept it running from above. She found more evidence scattered in the dust, a mug with fingerprints later matched to Evan E.S., and a cuff button identical to one Adrian Cross wore the day she met him. It wasn't just Lila's sanctuary, it had been someone's trap. By morning, both men were sitting across from her in the interrogation room. Evan looked hollowed out, eyes bloodshot, jaw trembling. I didn't hurt her, he said for the 5th time, voice cracking. Yes. I knew about Adrian. I followed her that night, but I never touched her. She begged me to understand. She said she was ending it with him. I left. That's all. Across the hall, Adrian's tone was colder. She was unraveling, he told Marla. She fabricated stories, projected her guilt. If I was there that night, it was only to help her. Marla slammed the photograph of the basement between them. You both were there, she said. We found traces of Lila's blood, not enough to confirm death, but enough to prove she was injured. And that camera was still running. One of you knows why. Neither spoke. Evan's fingers clenched into fists. Adrian's eyes flicked to the corner of the room, calculating. She left them stewing in silence and returned to the Monroe house. Crime scene techs were sweeping the basement, documenting every inch. One of them, a young forensic analyst, called out to her from the corner. Detective, you might want to see this. He pointed to a patch of disturbed soil near the far wall, beneath one of Lila's darker paintings. Marla knelt, brushing the dirt aside with gloved hands until metal glinted under the beam of her flashlight. It was a pendant, small, silver, engraved with LM, Her initials. The chain was broken, the clasp twisted. But what made Marla's heart freeze wasn't the jewelry. It was the faint rhythmic blink beside it. A second camera. Still on. Her reflection shivered in its lens as she lifted it, realizing someone, maybe even now, was watching from the other side. The hum of the house seemed to deepen, as if the walls themselves were breathing. Outside, thunder rolled again across the sky, the same as the night Lila disappeared. Marla looked up toward the ceiling, toward the quiet rooms above, the hidden wires, the lives entangled by deceit, and felt for the first time that the case wasn't just about finding out what happened to Lila Monroe. It was about who was still inside her house. The chapter ends as Marla steps backward, the pendant clutched in her hand, the red light of the camera still pulsing faintly in the dark, a heartbeat from beneath the earth, waiting to be answered. The rain hadn't stopped since morning, a cold, relentless drizzle that turned the sky the color of ash. Detective Marla Grayson sat in her car outside the polished brick office of Dr. Adrian Cross, listening to the faint hum of the windshield wipers. The nameplate beside the frosted glass door read Adrian Cross, Ph.D. Clinical Therapy and Emotional Wellness, a comforting title, wrapped around something far from pure. Inside, the office was all neutral tones and lavender candles. Books lined the walls, the air thick with the faint scent of sandalwood. Dr. Cross greeted her with the kind of controlled charm that only comes from years of studying other people's pain. He was tall, composed, the kind of man who smiled with his mouth but never his eyes. "I understand this is about my patient, Lila Monroe," he said, gesturing toward the chair across from him. "Tragic. What happened to her?" "Missing," Marla corrected softly. "Not happened. Not yet." His smile didn't falter, but something in his jaw tightened. "Of course, missing." Marla studied him as he spoke. The precise way he measured each word, the calculated calm. He claimed their sessions were professional, focused on grief and marital strain after Lila's miscarriage. But when she mentioned finding Lila's handwritten letters, the ones describing fear and betrayal, his eyes flickered just enough to confirm what she already suspected. Back at the station, she reviewed the items recovered from Lila's attic. A small digital recorder labeled session tapes. Evan had said they were part of Lila's therapy homework, reflections she never wanted anyone to hear. But someone had heard them. Someone had used them. Marla pressed play. Lila's voice filled the room, trembling, intimate. "Adrian says I need to let go of the past. But how do I let go when he's part of it now? He says what we have is special, forbidden but healing. I know it's wrong, but when I'm with him I feel like I can breathe again." A pause. Then another recording from weeks later. "He's changed. He gets angry when I cancel a session. He says I'm pulling away, that I'll regret it. Last night I saw him outside my house. I thought I imagined it, but the light in the kitchen was on and he smiled before walking away." Marla turned off the player, her stomach tightening. It wasn't therapy. It was control disguised as care. The next day she confronted Adrian again, this time in the presence of a warrant. She watched him shift from confident to cautious as texts seized his computer and hard drives. "You're making a mistake," he said evenly. Lila was unstable. She'd fixate on men who tried to help her. I was only keeping her safe from herself. Marla leaned closer. "You recorded her." He didn't deny it. "For therapeutic purposes," he said. "She gave consent." "Did she consent to you sleeping with her?" Silence. When the texts cracked into his encrypted folders, they found dozens of recordings. Some were clinical, ordinary therapy sessions. Others weren't. Adrian's voice turned from gentle to possessive, coaxing her into confessions, emotional dependency, and eventually, submission. He told her she was the only one who understood him, that they were meant to heal each other. But the last recording, dated October 28th, shifted everything. Lila's voice was raw, panicked. "I told him I couldn't keep lying to Evan. I told him it had to stop. He said no one would get hurt if I just stayed quiet. I think he means it. I think he's watching me. The recording ended with a scrape of furniture, a sharp intake of breath, and a whisper. "You promised, Lila." Marla froze the playback. The voice wasn't clear, but it was undeniably male, calm, familiar. Meanwhile, Evan's mental state had begun to crumble. He stopped answering calls, missed work, and was seen wandering their darkened house at night, lights flickering from room to room. He called Marla twice in one evening, once to accuse her of protecting Adrian, and once to beg her to tell him if his wife was dead. "She wouldn't just leave me," he said, voice hoarse from crying. "You don't understand her like I do. She'd been trying to fix things. She said she forgave me for everything. You think I don't know about the tapes, about him? She told me she ended it. He took her, didn't he?" Marla wanted to believe Evan's pain was genuine, but she also saw the fury beneath it, the kind that builds over time, slow and acidic, the kind that could snap. As the investigation deepened, the boundary between truth and manipulation blurred. Adrian painted himself as the victim of a fragile woman's obsession. Evan portrayed himself as the grieving husband wronged by them both. And Lila, the woman at the center of it all, was left voiceless, existing only in fragments of her own confessions. That night, Marla played the last of the recovered recordings one final time, alone in her apartment. Lila's whisper echoed through the speakers. "He said no one would get hurt." Then the sound of a door opening, footsteps descending, and the faint hum of a machine, steady, mechanical, buried deep beneath static. She remembered the wires running through the Monroe walls, the hidden surveillance network she'd found earlier. Lila's words matched perfectly with that sound. Marla shut off the recording, staring into the dark. She knew what she had to do next. If Lila had been recording her thoughts for him, for Adrian, maybe she'd also recorded her last moments. And if the hum in the background was what Marla thought it was, then the answer wasn't in the attic or the studio. It was somewhere deeper. The storm outside built into a full roar as she grabbed her coat and keys, the last echoes of Lila's voice playing in her mind. "You said no one would get hurt," Marla whispered to the empty room. "Then tell me, Lila, who did?" She stepped into the rain, the glow of her taillights fading into the night as thunder cracked overhead, leading her straight back to the Monroe home, where something unseen waited beneath the floorboards.